Paul's Damascus Road conversion, how do you top this? There's blinding light and booming voices. There's accusations coming from the heavens and the beginnings of healing and reconciliation. There's eyes covered with scales, which is actually kind of gross, isn't it? This is prime movie-making material, friends. And the story of the Apostle Paul's life would not be a low-budget film because it would need too many special effects. Definitely some pyrotechnics, maybe a fog machine, maybe a stunt double so that the actor playing Paul doesn't pull something when he gets knocked to the ground. And this scene that we read of today would be the pivotal moment in the movie. The moment that gets the dramatic music, the moment that changes the very trajectory of the entire story. Without today's scene, Paul's story would be much less powerful because we wouldn't really be able to relate to it. Paul, the saint, that's someone that we cannot really understand because we will never be that saint. But Paul, the sinner saint, someone who's made mistakes and yet is still loved and used by God, now that's someone I want to know. Today you'll hear me use both the names Saul and Paul at various times, and both refer to the same man. One is simply a Hebrew variant, and the other is a Greek variant of the same name. It's believed that the apostle was referred to as Saul prior to his conversion, and then was known as Paul when he started his ministry for Jesus Christ, perhaps because it was mostly among the Gentiles, and so he used his Greek name. But both are appropriate. Saul wasn't always a nice man. He admits it. In his first letter to Timothy, he says that he was formerly a blasphemer, a persecutor, and a man of violence. And in the book of Acts, we read that he stood and watched as the apostle Stephen was stoned to death because he would not stop preaching the good news of Jesus, and that Saul approved of his death. It goes on to say that Saul was ravaging the early Christian church by entering house after house, dragging off both men and women who were followers of Jesus and throwing them into prison. But we've got to understand something. Saul wasn't trying to be mean. He was trying to be faithful. He was trying to honor and obey what he felt were the laws of his religion. He was a Jewish Pharisee. So, of course, he was extremely observant of Jewish laws and traditions. He was totally convinced he was in the right. And he was totally convinced that they were in the wrong. And so, in his eyes, his actions were not only justified, they were righteous. There was another man named Ananias, one of Jesus' disciples, and he already knew about Saul because Saul's reputation for violence had already preceded him. And although initially when God called out to Ananias, he responded with the words, "Here I am, Lord, Hanani Adonai," he pushed back on God once he learned what God wanted him to do, because he knew what this man Saul had been up to, persecuting and arresting and aiding in the killing of Christians, and proud of it. And Ananias is not shy about sharing these concerns with God. "I have heard how many evil things he has done, Lord." Both Saul and Ananias are important in this story. And it might be easy to assume that Saul was the bad guy and Ananias was the good guy. But I don't think so. These were just two imperfect humans trying to follow God faithfully, both with an incomplete understanding of how God works. And by the end of the story, both men had received the opportunity to grow and to heal, and to put aside their fears and their prejudices, and to discover the fullness of God's mercy and love. Let's confess from the get-go that we are Saul, and that we are Ananias. We are totally convinced we are in the right, and we are totally convinced that they are wrong. So this text, which actually and interestingly shows up 3 different times in the book of Acts, once in real time as we watch the event unfold, which is what we saw today, and 2 more times when Saul is witnessing to how Jesus changed him by sharing this story. It's a story of grace and salvation. Paul was certain the Christians were the sinners, and yet it ended up being him who was in the wrong, and his life was changed forever. I don't think I've shared this with you before, but when I was in 5th grade, a new student joined our class. Shortly after she arrived, I learned she was the daughter of a Russian Orthodox mother and a Greek Orthodox father. I have no idea how I came to know this, because it's not really something that comes up when you're making clay pots out of Play-Doh. Now, I didn't understand what Orthodox meant, but I was pretty sure it meant trouble. So I made assumptions about her, based upon my own ignorance and my own arrogance. I ended up chasing her around the playground with a Bible one day during recess. And it's funny to think about this, yet it is absolutely mortifying at the same time, because that's not how I operate. Faith is an invitation, not an accusation. Faith is gracious, not judgmental. But apparently in that moment, I was sure I had the upper hand when it came to righteousness, that I was convinced that my heathen classmate needed salvation with an altar call on the teeter-totter and a spontaneous baptism in the school drinking fountain. Okay, I added the altar call and the baptism for dramatic flair, but I really did chase her with the Bible. I have no idea what the motivation was behind my actions, because the church I grew up in, the family I grew up in, they could not have been more different than what I did that day. But thankfully, and by some small miracle, this girl grew to be a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine. And she's one of the most spiritually attuned individuals I have ever known. She works as a spiritual leader and mentor, and if I can have half of her faith, by the time I grow old, I will be thankful. I was the one in error. I was the one in the wrong. And maybe we're all in this boat. No matter how good our intentions, here we are, standing in need of God's mercy. And God gives it, without restraint, without hesitation, even to the foremost sinners, because we are never beyond the reach of God's grace. So, a few questions for us today. First, do we persecute Jesus at times? I think yes. Of course, absolutely. Every time we fail to love as he did, which, let's face it, is pretty much every single day. When it's just our little circle, maybe our family, maybe our church family, maybe the people at work, maybe we can find a way to love them, even if we don't always like them. But when we widen that circle a little bit more to our neighborhood, to our city, to our country, to the world, we will see and hear people that we will struggle to love every single day. But every time we make a judgment against others by finding them unworthy and unfaithful, like Paul, I bet God must shake his head and look around for another dusty road, another blinding light, another way to knock the sense into us, like he had to do with Paul. The world is truly a hot mess right now, as Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis put it at the mayor's Interfaith Prayer Breakfast last Thursday. And I am struggling to love without judgment. Maybe you are too. When we cannot love without judgment, we are persecuting Christ. But the good news is Jesus knows we struggle, Jesus gives us the tool we need to love a little bit more every day, and Jesus forgives us when we just can't do it and invites us to try again. So do we persecute Jesus like Paul? Yes, but hopefully that helps us stay humble while we continue to grow. Secondly, are there times when we get blindsided and waylaid on our journey, like Paul on that road, and we lay in the dust, frozen with fear and confusion, unable to see either the world around us or our way forward? Is that happening anywhere in our lives right now? Has it happened in the past? If we are there right now, are we able to trust that better things await us if we will only get up and go when God tells us to go and go where God tells us to go and allow people to care for us, even people who we might once have seen as our enemy? Jesus said, "In this world, you will face persecution." Can we see how God is working through our own Damascus roads to bring us healing and hope? And finally, third, are there places where we get called to minister to people who persecute us, but who are still a beloved child of God, like Ananias? This question feels really timely to me. Are we called to care for people who persecute us, but who are still loved by God, no matter how off the mark they are? Paul hated those early Christians, hated them enough to hunt them down, hated them enough to go to the Sanhedrin, the religious authorities, get letters of permission from them so that he could literally hunt them down, anyone who followed Jesus, arrest them, and drag them back to Jerusalem to be punished. Hated them enough to want to wipe them off the face of the earth, and believed he had the right to do so, because obviously they were wrong. Are there people you'd like to wipe off the face of the earth right now? And yet it was Paul who God chose to carry the good news to the ends of the earth, the one who wanted to stop the preaching of the good news is now the one who will carry that good news for the rest of his life. So let's never forget that God is in control. God is actively and aggressively working through us to transform us into a new creation, the creation that he intends us to be. Even when we do bad things, even when we miss the mark, even when we assume we are better, with his divine wisdom and grace, God uses us for good, even we messy, complicated, imperfectly beautiful people. Our past choices are no obstacle to God using us. Our present concerns are no obstacle to God using us. Our personal faulty characteristics are no obstacle. Our private fears and anxieties are no obstacle to God using us for his good. We're all sinner saints. And like Oscar Wilde said, every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. So, let's remember that God sends us out into this world to add a little light, a little more joy, a little more love into the mix. And through this transforming of ourselves from what we were to who we are right now, to who we are yet to become, God frees us from the chains that bind us every time we judge another. Who is he calling us to love today? And who is he calling to love us today? We're all sinners, we're all saints, under the loving care of a redeeming God. So thanks be to God for never, ever, ever giving up on even us. Amen.